Hi guys, welcome to my video. I am Amy, a student who wants to be a lawyer in the future. Today I want to share the second part of the movie, The Trial of the Chicago 7 to you. We will focus on the court process and discuss the unfairness in the case. So let's start. Before we start, I have a question for everyone here. When the government uses a courtroom as a weapon, does the law even matter? A trial is supposed to be about justice, fairness, truth, and due process. But what happens when people in power decide the outcome before the first witness is even called in the trial of the Chicago 7? The courtroom wasn't a place for justice. It was a stage, a warning, a political tool of the government. They didn't put these men on trial because of what they did, but because of what they presented to residents. And when the bias is stronger than the truth, does fairness even stand a chance? And now, let's follow the process of the court in the movie to start today's content. Before the court begins, there is a process named as jury selection. It is the first preparation of every jury trial. And jury selection has another name. It is voir dire. And then, the process between number 2 to number 7 is the processes happen in the court. Also, I provide the real name of the case, and I have already shown it on the screen. If you are interested in the real case, I encourage you to check them online. And now, let's start the first process, jury selection. From the material I get online, it shows that every jury trial needs to proceed the process named jury selection. The purpose of this is to let the judge and attorneys to test the jurors. They need to test the jurors to check whether they have the ability to judge the case properly, to check whether the jurors hold any bias or discrimination to gender or race. It is a necessary process to protect both sides in the court, and also the process that tests the jurors is named as voir dire. If the attorney or judge think this juror holds potential bias or discrimination, they can have the juror excused. For attorneys, if they want to have the juror excused, they should promote a challenge in the court. And the challenges can be for cause or peremptory. Allow me to explain what is for cause or peremptory. If the challenge is for cause, the lawyer should provide a reason he would like to have the juror excused. If the challenge is for peremptory, it means the lawyer doesn't want to provide the reason. Of course, the right to decide belongs to the judge, so the judge must tell the reason, have the juror excused, whether for proper reason or based on bias. This process wasn't mentioned in the movie, but it is a fantastic example to show the bias from Judge Hoffman, because in the real case, the lawyer in defense promoted a challenge to have the juror excused, because he thought the juror held deep bias and discrimination to defendants. Without exception, the judge rejected every promotion. It is the first point of unfairness. This is a process named as opening statement. What is opening statement? An opening statement is the first opportunity for the lawyers to present their case to the judge or jury at the beginning of the trial. It is like a roadmap that outlines what each side plans to prove. We have several key features of an opening statement. It isn't an argument, it is a description of the story, and also the lawyers have to highlight those key evidences in their case. It is an important process because it can set the tone, for it can influence how the jury views the case from the start. In the trial of the Chicago 7, the prosecutors are Thomas Forward and Richard Schultz, while the defense attorneys are William Costello and Leonard Winglass. The prosecutors promoted that the defendant conspired to incite a riot during the 1968 Democratic National Convention, and then defense attorneys pointed out the police violate rights from the First Amendment. It is accurately what we talked about in the last video. If you are interested about it, please move on to my last video. But anyway, the First Amendment, you can just understand it as a part of the Constitution. Point out everyone has a right of protesting for themselves peacefully. Maybe you have a question. The Constitution protects the Chicago 7, but why are they still arrested? In the last video, I talked about the government was unconstitutional, and because of the bias from the judge and jurors, the trial itself is unfair. But I have to say something additionally. Constitution is the basis, but usually on a trial, we don't tell a person is innocent or not just by the Constitution. We always check the local law first, and then if any charge is against the Constitution, then the charge should be dismissed. So the unfair thing is the judge obviously on the charge of the court's state line to incite a riot was unconstitutional, but he remained. So the unfair thing is he didn't dismiss the charge, instead he kept it. And also from the defense attorney's opening statement, they promoted the police violate the right from the First Amendment. It is the same thing as I tell you. And now we are going to check the prosecution's case and the defense's case. Although they have similar names, but they hold different purpose. For the prosecution's case, its purpose is to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the crime. For the defense's case, the purpose is to create reasonable doubt about the defendant's guilt or prove a legal defense. For the overall process, prosecution presents its case first because they have the burden of proof. Defense responds to the prosecution's case, a proof in nonsense. And then the closing arguments summarize both sides before the jury or judge decides. Let's move on to the most important and special situation in the real case. It is about the black defendant, Bobby Seale. In the movie, we can actually feel about the bias and discrimination from the judge. Furthermore, he treated Bobby Seale unfairly. We have these several proofs. First, Bobby Seale had no legal representation. Second, the judge rejected his demand of defending himself. Third, he was badged, bound, chained to his chair. Finally, he eventually moved from the case. In the movie, Bobby Seale was badged and chained to the chair, which is the biggest evidence to show the bias and discrimination from the judge. Actually, the reality was more cruel. He was badged for 3 days. From the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, it clearly points out a defendant has a right to a lawyer in criminal cases. If they cannot afford one, the government must provide a lawyer, and then the lawyer should be a public defender. A defendant can't waive this right and represent themselves, so the judge was against the Constitution obviously, because the judge held too much racial bias. The trial became a place for political revenge. It's a part of closing arguments. Closing arguments are the final statements made by both prosecution and defenses at the end of the trial. This is their last chance to persuade jury or judge before a verdict is reached. The purpose of closing arguments are mainly for 3 parts. In this case, the prosecution reinforced its argument. The defendant conspired to incite violence, while the defense argued that the trial itself was political attack on free speech. It is perplexing to many people because the trial itself is the biggest proof of unfairness. So if you are in the trial, it is challenging to persuade the judge and jury who had clearly chosen a side. The verdict and sentencing is a part of the final result. The jury acquitted the defendant of conspiracy, but convicted 5 of them on charges of inciting a riot. Also, the judge sentenced all 7 defendants and their lawyers to contempt of the court. It is very obvious because every time the defendants made the judge mad, the judge said, "You committed a contempt of court." Finally, convictions were overturned on appeal due to the bias and misconduct from the judge. Maybe in the perspective of ours, we can find out the bias and discrimination from the judge and jury. But it is really difficult to prove it is innocent of the Chicago 7 because the purpose of the trial is to send them to the jail. It is mostly impossible for them to persuade a jury or judge. Conclusion to the question in the beginning. When the government uses the courtroom as a weapon, does the law even matter? Yes, it does. Fairness is the foundation of any trial. It's what separates justice from revenge, law from policies, but fairness isn't always guaranteed. It's shaped by the people who hold power in the courtroom: judges, juries, prosecutors. Which of them brings their experience, beliefs, and yes, bias? That's unavoidable. But does that mean we should punish a judge for holding bias? No, because if we did, there would be no one left to judge. Everyone carries bias, no matter what they stand on. The real challenge isn't eliminating bias, it's controlling it. We can't demand perfect neutrality, but we can push for accountability. We can educate, we can broaden perspectives, and we can build a system that minimizes the impact of a bias instead of pretending it doesn't exist. A trial of the Chicago 7 wasn't about justice, it was about control, and that's precisely why fair in the courtroom matters. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your patience on my English. I hope this video can inspire you to stand up for justice. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe and like. It is critical to my video and my channel. And now, the court is adjourned.